The gunshot echoed across the Colorado plains like thunder, but Nathaniel Keats didn't flinch. At 32, he'd grown accustomed to the sound, though this one wasn't from outlaws or hunting. It was his 5-year-old son James firing a toy wooden gun into the air of their modest homestead in 1878. The boy's imagination was the only thing that still sparked with life these days. Nathaniel watched from the porch of their weathered cabin, his calloused hands resting on the railing, his eyes searching the distant mountains as if expecting to see his wife, Margaret, walking home though she'd been gone nearly 8 months now. "Pa." James called out, his voice carrying across the yard where chickens pecked lazily at the dirt. "I got the bad guy," Nathaniel nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his tired blue eyes. "Good work, son." His gaze shifted to where his 3-year-old daughter, Emma, sat quietly on a blanket in the shade, her small fingers weaving through the prairie grass, her mother's honey-colored hair catching the afternoon sunlight. Inside the cabin, baby Thomas would be waking soon, hungry and fussing. The thought made Nathaniel's shoulders slump further. 3 children to raise alone, a ranch to manage, and a heart so hollow he sometimes wondered if it still beat at all. "Time to come in," he called, his voice flat, emotionless. "Supper soon." The routine never varied. He'd feed them, bathe them, tuck them in all without unnecessary words. The silence in their home was as vast as the plains surrounding them, broken only by the children's occasional laughter or tears. Nathaniel had words once, plenty of them, before pneumonia had stolen Margaret in the dead of winter, leaving him with nothing but memories and responsibilities too heavy for one man to bear. That evening, like all others, Nathaniel sat in the rocking chair by the fire, baby Thomas against his chest, while Emma and James played quietly on the floor. No stories, no songs, those had died with Margaret, just the crackle of the fire and the wind howling through the gaps in the cabin walls. When the knock came at the door, Nathaniel's hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped beside his chair. Visitors were rare at the Keats homestead, 10 miles from the nearest town of Silver Creek. "Who's there?" he called, his voice gruff from disuse. "Charlotte Porter, sir." "My wagon's broken down a half-mile east. I saw your chimney smoke." A woman's voice. Nathaniel hesitated, then stood, placing Thomas in the small wooden cradle before opening the door, rifle still in hand. She stood in the fading light, a woman perhaps in her mid-20s, with auburn hair escaping from beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was dusty from travel but of good quality, and her green eyes met his directly, without fear of the rifle or the imposing man before her. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. "The axle on my wagon snapped. I've been walking for hours looking for help." Nathaniel studied her. No wedding ring, traveling alone, unusual and potentially dangerous for a woman in these parts. "Where are you headed?" he asked, not moving from the doorway. "Silver Creek. I'm to be the new schoolteacher." James appeared at Nathaniel's side, curious eyes peering at the stranger. "Are you going to teach me?" he asked. Charlotte smiled, and something in Nathaniel's chest tightened at the warmth in her expression as she crouched down to James's level. "I certainly will, if you'd like to come to school. What's your name?" "James Keats. I'm 5. He held up his hand, fingers splayed proudly. "That's my sister Emma." "She's 3, and baby Thomas is crying again." Indeed, the infant had begun to wail from his cradle. Nathaniel turned, torn between the stranger at his door and his son's needs. "May I come in?" Charlotte asked. "It will be dark soon, and Her confidence faltered slightly. "I have nowhere else to go tonight. The proper thing would be to offer shelter." Margaret would have insisted on it, but Margaret wasn't here, and Nathaniel had grown wary of the world beyond his property line. Thomas's cries grew more insistent. With a curt nod, Nathaniel stepped aside. "You can stay the night. I'll look at your wagon tomorrow." "Thank you, Mr. Keats." She stepped inside, bringing with her a scent of lavender that seemed jarringly out of place in the sparse cabin. Nathaniel moved to Thomas, lifting the red-faced infant with practiced hands, but the baby continued to wail. 8 months, and Nathaniel still couldn't soothe him properly, something Margaret had managed with such ease. "May I?" Charlotte asked, setting down her small traveling bag and holding out her arms. I helped raise my sister's children back in Boston. Nathaniel hesitated, then handed over his son, watching carefully as she cradled Thomas against her shoulder. There now, she murmured, swaying gently. To Nathaniel's surprise, she began to sing, her voice clear and sweet in the dim cabin. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. The simple lullaby filled the room, and something extraordinary happened. Thomas's cries subsided. Emma looked up from her spot on the floor, her eyes wide with wonder. Even James stopped his playing to listen. Nathaniel stood frozen, emotions he'd locked away threatening to surface. No one had sung in this house since Margaret. The sound was both balm and knife, soothing yet cutting deep into wounds he'd tried to ignore. Charlotte continued singing, moving around the room with Thomas, who was now blinking sleepily against her shoulder. When she finished the song, the cabin fell into a silence different from the hollow, quiet Nathaniel had grown accustomed to. This silence felt expectant, alive somehow. "You have beautiful children, Mr. Keats," Charlotte said softly, looking down at Thomas's now peaceful face. "Nathaniel," he corrected, his voice rough. "Just Nathaniel." Their eyes met across the room, and for the first time in 8 months, Nathaniel felt something other than grief or emptiness. It unsettled him deeply. "Are you hungry, Miss Porter? I've got stew." "Charlotte, please, and yes, I haven't eaten since morning." That night, Charlotte slept in Nathaniel's bed while he took a blanket by the fire. The children were tucked in their room, having fallen asleep more easily than they had in months. Charlotte's lullabies working like magic where Nathaniel's gruff "good night" had always fallen short. In the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sound of another adult breathing in his home, Nathaniel stared at the ceiling, wondering what Margaret would think of this stranger who could sing their children to sleep when he could not. Morning brought clear skies and an awkward silence as Nathaniel prepared a simple breakfast. Charlotte joined him at the stove, efficiently slicing bread and pouring coffee as if they'd done this 100 times before. "I can help with the children while you check my wagon," she offered. "If that's agreeable." Nathaniel nodded, relief and wariness battling within him. "I'll hitch up the horses after breakfast." When James and Emma woke, they ran to Charlotte as if she were an old friend rather than a stranger who'd arrived last night. Thomas, in his cradle, cooed when she leaned over to greet him. "They're taken with you," Nathaniel observed, his tone neutral. Charlotte smiled, bouncing Emma on her hip. "Children respond to joy, Mr. Keats." "Nathaniel, they're starved for it sometimes, even when they're well fed and clothed." The words stung, though he knew she hadn't meant them as criticism. He'd provided for his children's physical needs, but joy, that had been buried alongside Margaret. After breakfast, Nathaniel rode out to examine Charlotte's wagon. The axle was indeed broken, requiring parts he didn't have on hand. It would mean a trip to town, a day's journey there and back. When he returned with the news, Charlotte was sitting on a quilt in the yard. The children gathered around her as she told them a story, her hands animated, her voice rising and falling with the tale. James was laughing, a sound so rare these days that Nathaniel paused, unwilling to interrupt. "And then the brave little rabbit hopped right over the fox's nose," Charlotte was saying, making a jumping motion with her hand that sent Emma into giggles. Nathaniel cleared his throat and 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. "The axles split clean through. I'll need to go to town for parts." Charlotte nodded, shading her eyes against the sun as she looked up at him. "I understand. When will you go?" "Tomorrow. It's too late to start today." He hesitated. "You're welcome to stay until it's fixed." "Thank you. I don't want to impose, but I'm grateful." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Perhaps I can earn my keep. Your garden could use some attention, and I noticed Emma's dress needs mending." Nathaniel glanced at the neglected vegetable patch, Margaret's garden. He'd barely maintained it, harvesting what grew but planting nothing new. "Do what you want with it," he said, more gruffly than intended. That evening, after Charlotte had again sung the children to sleep, Nathaniel found her sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars. He sat beside her, offering a cup of coffee, which she accepted with a smile. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said after a moment of silence. "I know it's not easy having a stranger in your home." Nathaniel stared into the darkness. "The children like you. They're wonderful children. You've done well with them, considering," she trailed off. Considering their mother is dead and their father barely speaks." The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. Charlotte turned to face him. "That's not what I was going to say, but it's true." He took a long drink of his coffee. "I provide for them, keep them safe, but the rest." He shook his head. "Margaret was the heart of this family. And now you're both heart and hands," Charlotte said gently. "It's a heavy burden." Something about her understanding, free of judgment, loosened the knot in Nathaniel's chest. "I don't know how to sing them to sleep," he admitted. "Or tell stories that make them laugh. But you know how to protect them, how to build a home strong enough to withstand winter storms, how to put food on their table." Charlotte's voice was soft in the darkness. "Those things matter too, Nathaniel." They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. "Where are you from?" he finally asked. "Boston originally, then Chicago. My father was a banker, my mother a musician." She smiled faintly. "I was engaged once to a lawyer. He died in the war. I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago. I decided teaching was my calling after that. I've been moving west ever since, school by school." She looked at him. "And you, have you always been in Colorado, Kentucky born, came west after the war?" "Met Margaret in Denver, brought her here to build something of our own." He stared at his hands. "She loved it here despite the hardships, said the sky was bigger than any cathedral." "She was right," Charlotte said, looking up at the vast expanse of stars. "I can see why you stayed." "The children," Nathaniel said, then paused. "And her?" "She's buried on the hill behind the house. Couldn't leave her." Charlotte reached out, her hand lightly touching his arm. The contact, brief as it was, sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the coffee. "I understand," she said simply. The next morning, Nathaniel prepared for his journey to town. As he saddled his horse, James came running out, Charlotte following with Thomas in her arms and Emma clutching her skirt. "Pa, can I come?" James asked, his face eager. Nathaniel hesitated. He rarely took the children to town, it was too much to manage alone, but with Charlotte here. "We could all go," Charlotte suggested, reading his thoughts. "The children would enjoy the outing, and I need to introduce myself to the town council anyway." The idea of traveling with Charlotte and the children, of presenting themselves as a unit to the town, made Nathaniel uneasy. People would talk. But looking at James's hopeful face, he found he couldn't refuse. "All right, get the wagon ready." The journey to Silver Creek took most of the morning, with Charlotte sitting beside Nathaniel on the wagon seat, baby Thomas in her lap, and James and Emma in the back, playing with toys Charlotte had fashioned from scraps of fabric and twine. They made quite a picture arriving in town, the taciturn rancher with the pretty young woman beside him and 3 children in tow. Nathaniel noticed the glances and whispers immediately. Charlotte, however, seemed unbothered. "I'll take the children to the general store while you see about the wagon parts," she said as they pulled up to the main street. "Perhaps get them some candy," Nathaniel nodded, fishing a few coins from his pocket. "Don't let James wander off, he's quick." Charlotte smiled. "We'll be fine." "Come find us when you're done." Watching her lead his children away, Thomas balanced on her hip as naturally as if he were her own. Nathaniel felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, not quite anxiety, not quite hope, but something in between. At the blacksmith's, Nathaniel arranged for the parts and repairs, agreeing to bring Charlotte's wagon in the following day. As he turned to leave, he nearly collided with Sheriff Dean Mills, an old acquaintance. "Nate Keats, as I live and breathe," the sheriff said, extending his hand. "Haven't seen you in town in months." Folks were starting to wonder. Nathaniel shook his hand briefly. "Been busy with the ranch." "And I see you've been busy in other ways too," Mills said with a knowing smile. "Pretty lady with your young'uns over at Benson's store. Moving on is good, Nate." "Margaret would have wanted it." "It's not what you think," Nathaniel said stiffly. "Miss Porter is the new schoolteacher. Her wagon broke down near my property. I'm helping her, that's all." Mills raised his eyebrows. "If you say so." "But the way she handles those kids of yours, well, a man could do worse." Nathaniel left without responding, irritated by the sheriff's presumption yet unable to deny the truth in his observation. Charlotte did handle his children with a natural grace that made his own awkward efforts seem all the more inadequate. At the general store, he found Charlotte helping Emma try on a small bonnet while James examined a wooden toy horse, and Thomas gurgled happily in a basket lined with blankets. "Papa," Emma cried, running to him. "Look at my hat, isn't it pretty?" Nathaniel crouched down to her level. "Very pretty, little one." "Miss Charlotte says I look like a proper lady," Emma said proudly. Nathaniel glanced up at Charlotte, who was watching them with a soft smile. "She's right," he said, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. "Can we get it, Pa, please?" Emma's eyes, so like her mother's, pleaded up at him. "Of course." He straightened up, pulling out his wallet. It had been too long since he'd bought his daughter anything that wasn't practical. As Charlotte placed the bonnet back in its box, Mrs. Benson, the storekeeper's wife, leaned over the counter. "You must be the new teacher," she said warmly. "We've been expecting you, though I see you've already found yourself a family." She winked at Nathaniel, who felt his face grow warm. "Mrs. Benson, it's not," he began, but Charlotte interrupted smoothly. "Mr. Keats has been kind enough to help me with my transportation troubles. I'm looking forward to meeting all the families in Silver Creek properly once I'm settled." Her tone was pleasant but firm, closing the subject. Outside the store, as they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Charlotte said quietly, "People will talk. I'm sorry if it makes things difficult for you." Nathaniel secured the last package. People always talk, doesn't matter. But it did matter in ways he wasn't ready to examine. The town, seeing them together, assuming things, it complicated feelings already complex enough. They stayed in town long enough to have a meal at the small hotel restaurant, a treat for the children who seldom ate anywhere but their own kitchen table. Charlotte charmed the waitress into bringing extra biscuits for James and Emma, and Thomas remained miraculously content throughout the meal. On the journey home, with the sun beginning to sink toward the horizon, Emma fell asleep against Charlotte's side, and James dozed in the back of the wagon. Only Thomas remained awake, his wide eyes fixed on Nathaniel as he drove. "He looks just like you," Charlotte observed, glancing down at the baby, the same serious expression. Nathaniel's lips quirked up slightly. "Margaret always said he'd be the thoughtful one." Said James got my stubbornness and Emma her charm, but Thomas would be the thinker. "She sounds like she was a wonderful mother." She was. The familiar ache of loss washed over him, but for the first time it didn't threaten to drown him completely. The best. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically. "What will you do after your wagon is fixed?" Nathaniel asked eventually, surprising himself with the question. Charlotte adjusted Emma's sleeping form against her. "Continue to Silver Creek, take up my position. The school term starts in 2 weeks. "That's only about 10 miles from the ranch," Nathaniel said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "Yes, it is." There was a note in her voice he couldn't quite identify. "James should start school," he said after another pause. "Margaret wanted him to get proper education. He's bright, he'd do well." Charlotte hesitated. "Emma too, in a couple of years." The idea of his children learning from Charlotte, seeing her daily but returning home to him, created a strange mixture of comfort and unease in Nathaniel's mind. "Would you?" Charlotte began, then stopped. "Never mind." "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "Would you consider letting me visit sometimes? After I'm settled, the children are wonderful and She looked away. "I've grown fond of them in just these few days." Nathaniel's hands tightened on the reins. "You'd be welcome," he said finally, the words feeling inadequate for the relief they brought him. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt dangerously natural. Charlotte tended the garden, her skilled hands bringing order to the neglected plants. She mended clothes in the evenings, taught Emma simple songs, and showed James how to form his letters. Thomas, who had always been fussy, became calmer, responding to her voice with coos and smiles. Nathaniel found himself watching her when she wasn't looking the way sunlight caught in her hair, how her hands moved gracefully at whatever task she undertook, the patience in her eyes when James asked endless questions. Each observation made the inevitable day of her departure more difficult to contemplate. On the third morning, Nathaniel hitched up the horses early and drove Charlotte's wagon into town for repairs. The blacksmith promised it would be ready by the following afternoon, which meant one more night with Charlotte under his roof, one more night of children's laughter filling the cabin, one more night of not eating alone after they were asleep. One more night pretending this wasn't temporary. When he returned home, he found Charlotte and the children by the creek that ran along the eastern edge of his property. She had her skirts hitched up to her calves, wading in the shallow water with Emma while James attempted to catch minnows with a makeshift net. Thomas sat on a blanket in the shade, chewing contentedly on a wooden rattle. For a moment, Nathaniel remained on his horse, watching them unseen. The tableau before him was so perfect, so achingly like the future he'd once envisioned with Margaret, that he almost turned away. But then Charlotte looked up, spotted him, and waved, her smile bright enough to reach him even at a distance. "Join us," she called. "The water's wonderful." Before he knew it, he'd dismounted and was walking toward them, drawn by something stronger than his grief. That evening, after the children were asleep, Charlotte sat beside Nathaniel on the porch steps, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The night was warm, cicadas singing in the tall grass, stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. "Your wagon will be ready tomorrow," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes," she looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "I should be at the schoolhouse by nightfall. The children will miss you," he swallowed. "James asked if you could still tell him stories even after you leave." Charlotte smiled sadly. "I'll miss them too, more than I expected." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Nathaniel, I hope you don't think I was trying to replace their mother or that I overstepped." "You didn't." He met her gaze steadily. "You brought something back to this house that I thought was gone forever." "What's that?" "Life," he said simply. "Before you came, we were just existing, the children and me, going through motions, but these past few days there's been laughter again, singing. It feels like a home, not just a place we live." Charlotte's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "I'm glad. Your children deserve that, and so do you, Nathaniel." "I don't know how to keep it after you're gone," he admitted, the confession costing him more than she could know. Her hand found his in the darkness, warm and solid. "You'll find a way. You're stronger than you think." Nathaniel looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "What if I don't want to find a way without you?" The words hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Charlotte's breath caught, her fingers tightening around his. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that in 3 days you've woken something in me I thought was dead." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm saying I don't want tomorrow to come. I don't want you to leave." He paused, gathering courage. "I'm saying I think I could love you, Charlotte Porter, if you gave me time." For a terrible moment she was silent, and Nathaniel feared he'd ruined everything. Then she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gentle kiss that spoke of possibility. "I think I could love you too," she said when they parted. "I think I already do a little. Is that too forward of me?" Nathaniel laughed softly, the sound surprising both of them. "Nothing about you has been what I expected, Charlotte, but everything about you has been what we needed." She rested her head against his shoulder and they sat together in the darkness, contemplating a future neither had anticipated. "The town will talk," she said after a while. "Let them. It's soon after Margaret." 8 months, he said, "the longest of my life. And the first time I felt anything but grief was when you sang my children to sleep." Charlotte lifted her head to look at him. "I won't try to replace her, ever. I know, and I won't ask you to." He touched her cheek gently. "But maybe we can build something new together." "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." The next day, Nathaniel drove Charlotte into town to collect her repaired wagon, but instead of a farewell, they spoke to the town council together. Charlotte would take up her position as schoolteacher as planned, but she would commute from the Keats ranch, where she would stay as a guest in their spare room until a proper courtship could be conducted, and if all went well, a wedding planned. There were raised eyebrows and whispers, of course. But there was also understanding. Life on the frontier was hard enough without denying the chance for happiness when it appeared. Charlotte moved her few belongings into the ranch's small second bedroom that had once been used for storage. Each night, she sang the children to sleep. Each day, she taught James his letters and helped Emma learn to sew. She planted vegetables in Margaret's garden, preserving some of the original layout while adding her own touches. Nathaniel began to speak more, to laugh occasionally. He learned to tell bedtime stories, awkward at first, then with growing confidence. He carved toys for the children and built Charlotte a proper desk for her lesson plans, In the evenings, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch and talked. About their pasts, their hopes, their fears. About Margaret, whom Charlotte insisted should never be forgotten. About the future they might build together. 3 months after Charlotte's wagon broke down near his property, Nathaniel Keats took her to the hill where Margaret was buried. He introduced them properly, speaking to the simple wooden cross as naturally as if his first wife could hear. "She would have liked you," he told Charlotte afterward as they walked hand in hand back to the house. "She always said I'd be lost without someone to balance me." "I wish I could have known her," Charlotte said sincerely. "She raised wonderful children." "So will you," Nathaniel said, stopping to face her, "if you'll have us, all of us." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "Is that a proposal, Nathaniel Keats?" "A poor one," he admitted with a small smile. "But an honest one. I love you, Charlotte. The children love you. Will you marry me and make this family whole again?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." They were married in the spring of 1879 with wildflowers covering the prairie and new life everywhere they looked. James proudly carried the rings. Emma scattered flower petals, and Thomas, now walking, toddled down the aisle of the small Silver Creek church with guidance from Sheriff Mills. That night, after celebrating with the townsfolk who had come to accept their unusual beginning, Nathaniel and Charlotte stood on the porch of their home, truly theirs now, with touches of both Margaret and Charlotte making it richer than before. Happy. Nathaniel asked, his arm around his new wife's waist. Charlotte leaned into him, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "Completely, and you, more than I ever thought possible again." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for breaking down near my ranch." "Thank you for not turning me away," she replied, looking up at him with love. From inside came the sound of Emma calling for a bedtime story. Charlotte and Nathaniel exchanged smiles. "Together?" she asked. "Together," he agreed, taking her hand and leading her inside to their waiting family, a family no longer shrouded in silence, but filled with song, stories, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected beginnings.